Hello there YouTube, I'm Father Dugan9000 and welcome back to the first episode in over a year and a half of Best on Earth, a series where I compare two or more things against each other for the hell of it. This is a little mini-series I did back in 2011 and I would have continued it earlier, but I'd been busy with a hell of a lot of things during 2012 and I kinda got stumped on what to compare for a while, so I just gave the series a rest. However, I'm finally back and it's time to cover a very particular duo of games. The Sonic Adventure games. Be it the nostalgia factor, the fact that these games were made for the holy Dreamcast or what have you, despite having as many flaws as all the other early 3D Sonics up to 06, Sonic Adventures 1 and 2 are still considered to be the best 3D Sonics by a lot of fans, with Sonic Adventure 3 being one of the most requested sequels to be made in ever. The funny thing is, we actually did get Sonic Adventure 3. It was called Sonic 06. I'm well aware that a ton of people are going to flame the living hell out of me for saying this, but think about it. Sonic 06 shares a lot of elements and ideas with the adventure duo. Many gameplay styles, a complex story, hilarious awful acting, they even share some set pieces. So, like it or not, Sonic 06 is basically Sonic Adventure 3 in all but name. Because of this, I thought it'd be fun to compare all three games with one another and see which one comes out on top. So here's how the point system will work. The winner gets 3 points, second place gets 2 points, and the loser gets a single point. Hopefully this will make it easier to determine which game I think is better. Now before I begin, I want to make it clear that all of this is opinion based. If you disagree with me on anything, that's perfectly fine since this video is not objective fact and you're entitled to your own opinion. But for God's sake, don't start flaming me, or anyone else for that matter, just because they or I have a different opinion from you, okay? Now that we have that out of the way, let's finally begin Best on Earth and compare the Sonic Adventure Trilogy. Graphics. Okay, this one is pretty obvious considering one of these games came a generation after the first two, but Sonic 06 wins this round. While it's a next-gen game, it doesn't look all that great. On its own, it actually does look pretty good. The character models, at least for the main characters, are well done if a little creepy. The environments are colorful and decently made, and the lighting's actually quite good for its time. It's not the best next-gen Sonic could have achieved in 2006, but for what it's worth, it's pretty good. The slightly harder task here is deciding between Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 for second place, since both games also have pretty good graphics for their time. While SA1 does have the creepy origami humans of the devil, I'm giving that game second place over SA2. Why? Because that game reuses its assets to an insane extent. Several levels are the exact same design-wise with shared environments and it just feels bloody lazy. Music. Oh boy is this gonna be hard. All three of these games have soundtracks that range from damn good to amazing, so trying to figure out which is the best is going to be quite difficult. Sonic Adventure 1's soundtrack was very experimental due to being the first Sonic game in years with an optical media soundtrack, so you ended up with many different kinds of music genres being represented like jazz, soft rock, techno, and even a few remixes of songs from previous Sonic games. Adventure 2's music was a little less varied than before, with a greater emphasis on guitar, keyboard, and mosh fests, but there were still quite a few damn good tracks, with particular mention going towards Knuckles' hilariously yet still pretty decent rap themes. And finally, Sonic 06 tried to go for more of an epic feeling and put less focus on the guitar themes, with many level songs having more varied genre takes like slow rock or Egyptian-styled instruments, and there are even a few orchestral melodies, some of which are honestly very good. Now, when it comes to which game had the best soundtrack, I'm tied between Sonic Adventure 1 and Sonic 06, both of which had very good varied tracks. Not to say Sonic Adventure 2's music was terrible, as I said it's damn good, but it's just not as varied as Adventure 1 or 06, so unfortunately it'll have to go third while Adventure 1 beats out 06 for having more enjoyable music tracks to listen to. Voice acting. Now for the record, I'm discussing the English dub only, since that's really the only aspect of the voice acting the fanbase talks about. For those of you who haven't already heard about this, Sonic 06 had a completely different voice cast from the Adventure duo, with this new cast being the 4Kids cast who had dubbed Sonic X a few years prior. Ignoring the notions of, wow, the cast changed, 4Kids is evil, and all that nonsense, I think Sonic 06 wins this round. The acting may have been awful, but at least it was enjoyably awful, mostly thanks to the god that is Dan Green and Jason Griffith's shadow. Besides, the acting issues had more to do with the fact that the acting was directed by Japanese voice directors. Yeah, you can see how that might go wrong. But hey, at least they actually tried to act, unlike the rather wooden performances seen in the Adventure duo. Yes, some of the voices suit the characters, but the actual acting left a lot to be desired in the long run. However, I slightly prefer the acting in Adventure 1 because it didn't have the litany of technical problems in Adventure 2, so Adventure 2 loses. Again. Level design. Okay, when I bring up level design, I don't just mean the aesthetics. I also mean how well designed are the levels, so let's go through it game by game, shall we? Sonic Adventure 1 introduced slightly more realistic worlds, but still kept a lot of surreal elements that the earlier games had, which resulted in many iconic levels such as Emerald Coast, Radical Highway, and more. There was also a lot of variety in the actual level structure as well. Some levels were fast-paced and linear, while others were slow but had a lot of areas to explore. Personally, I think Adventure 1 had the best level design out of all three games, but for a reason that I think is very underrated. Sonic's level designs. It's not because they were speed, but because they shared the same spirit of the Mega Drive level designs. Well, let me explain. Despite what some believe, the Mega Drive games weren't constant roller coasters. The speedy sections were a reward for getting through tightly designed platforming sections, and the Sonic levels in Adventure 1 stayed true to this idea, which is why the speedy parts were so rewarding and why I think that game wins this round. As for Sonic Adventure 2, like I said earlier on, it suffers from having too many similar level designs and aesthetics. By the time you finish both stories, you're bound to have gone through each environment 2 or 3 times at least. There's also the fact that they're not as inspired as before, having generic desert, forest, military base, San Francisco based themes, which feel very unoriginal and don't really fit in a Sonic game. And finally, and I know I'm going to get bashed for this, some of SA2's levels I find to be very frustrating, particularly levels like Eternal Engine, Security Hall, and the last Sonic and Shadow levels. Actually, that's another thing I don't like about SA2's design. The Sonic and Shadow levels are nothing but linear roller coaster fests that I don't think are as fun or rewarding as those seen in the original Adventure, or heck, even Sonic 06. Speaking of which, a lot of people despise several levels in Sonic 06 because of how frustrating they are, but I think that has to do more with a certain problem I'll get to later on. When I ignore that particular problem and just focus on the looks and structure, I think it's actually pretty decent all around. The looks are more inspired in Adventure 2, though boring compared to the surreal madness in Adventure 1, and the actual design harks back to the original Adventure. This means that the design is a bit more varied in Adventure 2, and even Sonic's stages feel better designed, at least in theory anyways, as they're slower paced and try to bring back the balance between platforming and speed not seen since SA1. Overall, while there are some frustrating bits of level design in 06, I still think it's better than Sonic Adventure 2. Characters, gameplay styles. The gameplay styles for the different characters in Adventure 1 had a few big problems despite the quality of Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles' stages and the wide variety of styles available. Amy's gameplay felt far too slow and dull compared to the more seamless gameplay seen with the aforementioned characters. Gamma was a bit clunky and didn't really feel all that memorable in the grand scheme of things. And Big the Cat's fishing gameplay can burn in the pits of hell naked and alone for all I'm concerned. Adventure 2 and 06's gameplay in regards to the characters were improved, and the quality of the characters like Sonic and Knuckles still shone through, though they still had their fair share of flaws, such as clunky mecha stages being a bit glitchy in areas, and with both games having very similar styles between characters to the point that it just felt lazy. While better than Adventure 1, neither of them are significantly good enough to take first place, so for this round they'll both tie at second place. Story. Yes, even though Sonic hasn't had the greatest reputation for stories, not counting Sonic Colors, we still have to look at this. Rather robotic acting aside, Sonic Adventure's 1 story was pretty good. It tried to do something that hadn't been done in the series at the time by doing an epic story that delved into the lore of the floating island to make what turned out to be a genuinely interesting plot. Add in some character development for Tails, Amy, and infamously Gamma, and you've got a complex but well-made plot for a late 90s platformer. The plot for Adventure 2, on the other hand, has been criticized in some quarters for being very ridiculous and adding in all sorts of nonsensical elements that just felt out of place for a Sonic game. And yeah, I can kinda see where these people are coming from. It's not a completely terrible plot. Shadow and Rouge are actually kinda compelling for one thing, but when you have a plot that goes on about AIDS, insanity, genocide, and more in a Sonic game, that's going to get you some very strange looks from people. However, we can agree on this much. Sonic 06 has the worst plot. Though there is some attempt at character development, and Mephiles is a pretty awesome villain, it doesn't save the story from being essentially really bad Final Fantasy fanfiction. The story is incredibly convoluted and nonsensical. Captain Obvious lines reign supreme here. Most of the characters contribute feck all to the events of the game, and then there's that romance. Actually, scratch that. I kinda liked it, and it's honestly nowhere near as bad as people say it is. But given how insane some of the shippers in the fanbase can get, Sega really should have known better than to do an actual romance with a human of all things. So, yeah. Glitches. Right, we all know that Sonic 06 is the glitchiest out of all of these games. Be it glitches that people do on purpose or technical problems that crop up when just playing through the game normally, Sonic 06 is packed to the brim with all manner of glitches. Some amusing, others really irritating. This is usually the biggest problem people have with the game, and while I don't think it's that detrimental to the experience, yeah, I can see where most of the hate comes from. As for the adventure games, the winner of this round will be Adventure 1, mainly because it seemed more polished than Adventure 2, which had a fair share of moments where I died because of irritating glitches. Challenge. Aside from the evil Big the Cat stages and the terrible final boss, I thought the challenge in the original Adventure 1 was actually pretty fair. Though the camera would screw up on occasion, when you died in Sonic Adventure 1 95% of the time, it was your own fault, and the level design certainly didn't try to pull loads of dick moves that require at least one death to get past them, as with certain other games. And as mentioned before, Adventure 2 does have its glitchy moments, and it has quite a few frustrating stages, as I've mentioned before. However, for the most part, it was certainly challenging in a fair way. At least most problems weren't caused by some small part by the game's glitchy nature, as with Sonic 06. While the glitches overall don't bother me as badly as everyone else, I'll be fair and admit that a lot of deaths I had in the game were due to Sonic 06 just being a glitchy game overall. Falling off certain surfaces that you were supposed to stay on, getting stuck in random areas, and the like all contributed to a feeling that the game was trying to drive you mental at times. Also, that challenge where you have to take on a brigade of robots without any rings, feck that challenge! Bosses. The bosses in SA2 I thought were pretty lackluster. Most of them felt like they were copies of earlier bosses, they went on for far too long or were really easy. Yes, some bosses had interesting strategies, but it still doesn't stop them from being quite bad overall. Adventure 1's bosses were also a little repetitive, but hey, at least they were actually pretty fun to go through, and a lot of them, with the final boss being the only big exception, felt like they were a fair challenge and they didn't overstay their welcome, at least as far as I was concerned. Sonic 06's bosses were generally alright, though some of them were certainly bloody frustrating, mostly again due to the glitches, but they certainly weren't as annoying as Adventure 2's bosses. So for this one, Adventure 1 is again crowned the winner. Theme song. Okay, let me make this quite clear. I do not care at all for his world. It's not a bad song, don't get me wrong, but I don't really find it to be all that great either, especially since I find it to be a bit cringeworthy. Live and Learn is widely considered to be an awesome song, and it certainly deserves that because it is pretty damn good and quite fun to listen to. But personally, I'm going to have to crown Open Your Heart as the winner. It sounds unbelievably epic, it's used very well as the final boss theme, and it's just an amazingly cool song in general. And finally, gameplay. Despite the aforementioned problems with half of the gameplay styles, I think Sonic Adventure 1's gameplay has held up the best. The Knuckles stages were actually pretty fun to play and explore the huge worlds instead of just a slog. Tails' levels offered an interesting time attack angle to stages and controlled much as expected, and generations aside, I think Sonic's levels are the closest that the franchise has ever gotten to reproducing the Mega Drive's tight balance between slow platforming and fast obstacle courses in the third dimension. Adventure 2, on the other hand, has not held up so well. The treasure hunting stages are a confusing, tiring slog to go through, the mecha levels were very clunky and dull, and even the Sonic stages were a lot more linear and frustrating than before. It's not a bad game, but it's definitely one of the weaker Sonic games, in my opinion anyhow. And finally, despite its many glitches and sharing similar styles to the point of laziness, I actually thought Sonic 06's gameplay was pretty decent. Sonic's levels were less linear and tried to offer a balance between platforming and speed. Shadow's stages were improved upon what had been attempted in Shadow the Hedgehog, and I even like Silver's slower-paced platform-centric levels, even if a few sections were pretty terrible. Overall, while it's definitely the worst next-gen Sonic, I can at least say that 2006 is a damn sight better than Adventure 2. Final score, with the final winner being Sonic Adventure 1. In the end, Sonic Adventure 1 is the game that's held up the best, and there's good reason for its huge following. Despite its pitfalls, when it's good, it's really good. It's got the best music, the best gameplay, the fairest challenge, it's the most polished, the plot's held up quite well, and it's overall one of the best early 3D Sonics, only just losing out to Heroes in this reviewer's humble opinion. And yes, Sonic 06 does deserve most of its criticism, but I still think it's pretty decent. The graphics were actually pretty good, it did genuinely try to improve on previous flaws, the word being try. The music was much more varied than before and interesting, and the voice acting was hilariously bad. If you find the game somewhere for a really cheap price, I say go for it, but don't expect anything amazing. Unfortunately, Adventure 2 has held up the worst out of them all. There's just a lot of mistakes that it makes in its story, its gameplay, its level design, and more that just make it an incredibly average game overall, sorry to say. I'm Father Dugan 9000, and I hope you enjoyed watching the latest of Best on Earth. Don't worry, I'll try have these come out a little bit more often, maybe every 3 to 6 months or something like that. Anyhow, until we meet again, have a great day all. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to defend myself from the Rabbit Adventure 2 fans for about the 3rd time this year. Better get a truckload of Sonata fanfics this time around, might actually do some good, you know?
Yes!